Hello everybody! In the wake of the new Jujutsu Kaisen 0 movie, I felt it would be a good idea to visit the Shibuya Incident arc, the next major animated section of the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, and rank all of its fights from worst to best. As usual, you should expect spoilers for this video, and I hope you enjoy this very short, brief preview of all the Jujutsu Kaisen Shibuya arc incident fights. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, at number 13 we have Ino versus Ogami and her grandson. Now right off the bat, I just want to say that none of the fights in this arc are necessarily bad, but this one in particular is just kind of underwhelming, as we only get to see 2 of Ino's beasts from his auspicious summons, and the 4th one gets interrupted by the Toji summon, which is the height of this fight, but altogether, he kind of just doesn't do much in this fight. It is kind of cool to see the backstory between Ogami and Jiro and how their powers work, and also it kind of introduced how big of a risk it is to have Gojo be sealed during these times, as they are examples of how he has stopped people in the shadows from attacking the Jujutsu world. But overall, this fight doesn't do much to progress the story, except set up Toji to infiltrate Dagon's domain later and fight Megumi. Still interesting nonetheless. Okay, next up we have Itadori versus the Grasshopper Curse. Now, I know this fight might be pretty forgettable to most people, but I really like this fight just because it shows how fast Itadori is becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer. He effortlessly combos and parries every one of the Grasshopper's attacks, and even after the Grasshopper gets the upper hand with the surprise attack, he still handles him with no ease. It really shows just how powerful Itadori is becoming, and how much of a formidable foe he will become in the future. Also, this fight kinda marks the beginning of how Gege Akutami describes his fights, which I'm a big fan of. He will usually go into detail about the small intricacies of how the creatures move and how the characters are thinking during battle, and it really adds a flavor to the fights that I have yet to see in other manga, and it makes them way more engaging and interesting. Plus, look at these shots of Itadori. When these fights get animated, I'm going to look forward to how cool he looks in all of these poses. Okay, at number 11 we have Nobara and Nanami versus Haruta. Now, this was probably what people decided was the lamest fight of the Shibuya arc, since Nobara doesn't really have a prevalent role in this fight. She kinda just loses to Haruta until Nanami comes up, but man, I just love how cool they make it seem to be a grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer. Haruta doesn't even stand a chance against Nanami, and they show just how outpaced and out of his league he is against Haruta, was previously struggling with. That dichotomy and juxtaposition really shows just how much it has to grow, and is the pinnacle of what makes a shonen manga really good. Plus, I really like the detail of Haruta's curse technique, with the shadows under his eyes disappearing as he loses each life. It's a detail that the author doesn't outright state in the manga, but you just notice it if you watch the fight over and over again like I have. It's really cool to see how detailed and how much care he puts into this character's curse techniques and how creative that he can become. Really nice fight, but I wish Nobara had more, roles in this arc as a whole. Except for her role at the end of the arc when you know what happens. Okay, now is where we start getting to the good stuff. For number 10, we have Meimei and Ui versus the SMALLPOX deity, a special curse by the corrupted ghetto. Now, this fight is probably one of the most interesting of the Shibuya arc because it introduces a new character into the fighting, and that is Meimei and her curse technique, which is crow manipulation. This curse technique is really interesting since it allows her to basically one-shot any opponent she has, and apparently the only person who's even able to survive a shot from it was Gojo Sensei himself. What this technique allows her to do is to force a crow to commit suicide, which will create a binding vow with a new crow that would basically give it god strength in return for its life. This is also an interesting fight in the way that they use her brother Ui. He uses his own curse technique to amplify his curse energy so that the special grade SMALLPOX deity, his domain expansion, it affects Ui except for her so that she has the time to activate her crow curse technique. which is ultimately how they win the fight. It is interesting that she said that only GOJO was able to survive Bird Strike. That means she possibly has one of the most devastating attacks in the universe so far. I'm hoping that she returns to the manga because this was her only fight that she was introduced into, and then she kind of gets relegated out of the story. But other than that, this is a pretty solid beginning fight for the Shibuya incident arc and is really telling of what's to come. For next up on this number 9th place, we have Itadori and Megumi versus Jiro Awasaka. This fight is just fun, like just pure unbridled shonen fun. We get to see the two protagonists, Megumi and Itadori, fight with one another by their side, which is actually pretty rare for this series, as the only time this has occurred is at the beginning of the series, and that was barely a fight between them both. I think that this really showcases the strengths in both of them, how Fushiguro is great strategizing a plan against his inverse technique, and how Itadori is just so good at implementing his strength in order to accomplish that plan. And also, Jiro Awasaka's technique, inverse, was creatively showcased in this way, of how it has a maximum and minimum amount of pressure. Overall, this fight just screams classic shonen battle. Also, the panel at the end where Itadori just adjusts his punch in order to knock him straight out, it's just pure raw action. So yeah, nothing more to say on that fight, let's move on. Now for number 8 spot, we have MELAMARU versus MAHITO. Now, this fight just hits you right in the feels. We already know that MELAMARU's life kinda sucks because of his binding vow. It gives him a lot of control over a large amount of curse energy, but at the expense of his own really fragile body. And then we get intel that he is secretly the traitor of Jujutsu Kaisen High, but that he did it so that he can get his body repaired by Mahito. Now, in the end, he doesn't actually get to go back to them because he dies in this fight, sadly. And the portrayal of his death is straight up horror. Like, it is horrifying how he dies in this fight. But the fight itself is really nice to look at. Like, you can really see the scenery was done well in this. We get to see MELAMARU's techniques that he has garnered over the 9 years of accumulation of his cursed energy. And we also get to see Mahito yet again adapting to his fight with MELAMARU. And then you have Geto in the background just observing this majestic fight of a giant mech versus a small curse. It's really exhilarating how the author of this manga can take existing concepts and adapt them to new fights while evolving the concept even further. We get to see that with MELAMARU's simple domain technique, which counters Mahito's domain expansion. And constantly in the fight, we have flashes of MELAMARU hoping and begging for him to get out of this fight alive just so he can go see his friends again and tell them the Shibuya Arc incident's plan. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, he doesn't get to do that, and we're left with the final shot of this fight with MELAMARU's corpse in the robot and Mahito and Geto leaving the fight, stating how easy it was to kill him. Very emotional indeed. And I feel that this fight is extremely underrated as it comes right before the Shibuya arc and is not as anticipated as some of the other fights that we see in the manga, as well as underappreciated because, MELAMARU wasn't really a liked character among the fanbase. It's still sad to see him go though. For this next fight, people might get a little bit upset at me at the placement since I know it's a popular fight in the Shibuya arc incident, but that fight I'm talking about is, of course, Megumi versus his dad Toji Fushiguro. Now, this fight is pretty short, which is why I kind of put it in this placement, but that doesn't mean it's bad at all. In fact, it's pretty good, especially when you consider the non-standard character writing done to Toji Fushiguro, Megumi's father. This guy has such good character writing done to him, even though he never makes an official appearance in the story once. He only shows up in flashbacks, and yet his impact on the Jujutsu Kaisen story and world as a whole can never be unfelt. And the way that this fight ends, with Toji Fushiguro ending his life after hearing Megumi's official name, really makes this fight way more emotional than it had any right to be. And it really just accomplishes Toji's character as being one of Gege Akitami's best work in this manga. Just a true masterpiece of a character. And of course, it slowly develops Megumi as he tries to visualize how to fight against Toji instead of just outright losing like he has previously. The way that Megumi is constantly thinking and on his toes while utilizing his new Shikigami, the Escape Rabbit, really makes this fight way more entertaining than what I was expecting on my first watch, or read I guess you could say. Really solid but subtle character development coming from Megumi. Okay, for number 6, we have Sukuna versus Megumi's Ultimate Shikigami Mahoraga. Another controversial pick, I'm pretty sure, but this fight is just so awesome. You have Sukuna, probably the strongest character in the series, go up against this absolute beast, this monster, and he eradicates it with ease. Please note that Mahoraga was the Shikigami responsible for taking out the first Six Eyes user, so to see it completely get devastated by Sukuna's unrelenting attacks from his domain expansion Malevolent Shrine and his newly discovered Fire Curse technique is a sight to behold. Plus, the shots of Sukuna in this manga page and these chapters are just breathtaking. You can really tell Gege Akutami gets better over time with his action art, and it really shines through in these couple of chapters where Sukuna fighting style just shines so good, and it all culminates with his domain expansion slashing technique literally appearing in the form of the Japanese symbol for slash above the city of Shibuya. Overall, this fight is just pure unbridled action, and it's so fun to watch. It's probably one of the most rewatchable fights of this arc just because of how fast-paced it is and how clearly everything is portrayed. It's easily one of the most fun fights to watch in this arc, and it really showcases just how much of a savage that Sukuna is and how hard he's going to be to take down. Also, a fun fact to note is that Sukuna said if it was his previous self before this arc, he actually would have lost to Mahoraga, which just showcases how devastating Fushigero's ultimate attack really is. Do not regret placing it this high whatsoever. Okay, so here's where we get into the top 5. All of the fights from here on out are some of the best fights that the Jujutsu Kaisen manga has to offer. For number 5 spot, we have GOJO versus the entire Cursed Spirit team, with Mahito, Choso, JOGO, and Mahito. Now, looking back on this fight, I feel like this is just complete fan service for people who like GOJO before his time in the manga is basically up, since he is no longer featured in the manga as a prevalent character. But man, this fight really shows just how much trouble it is for the Cursed World to have someone of his caliber around. He literally has no problem dealing with Hanami in like 2 panels, like she's just dead. And the only reason why their plan worked in the first place is because they had to use human body shields as a way to distract GOJO from interrupting the Prison Realm's timer. And another thing we get to see with this fight is just how dark the series is going to be for Jujutsu Kaisen. There are mass casualties happening everywhere in front of GOJO that he has to stop, and it all comes down to him having to use 1.2 seconds of his domain expansion just to stop the already transfigured humans from killing more people. This moment really showcases GOJO's humanity, as he has to make a choice between either killing the people on the 5th floor in order to ensure the death of the cursed spirits and also to save everyone else in the subway station, or no, not doing that. It all culminates in this really cool moment where you see GOJO standing over the subway station holding 2 heads from the 1,000 transfigured humans that he has killed in 1.2 seconds, really showcasing why he alone is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer that's ever lived. A great fight scene for a wonderful character who undoubtedly will be written out of the story from this point since he is too overpowered. And this fight also has the hidden bonus of showing a believable way for the Cursed Spirit team to actually win over GOJO with the Prison Realm. Alright, at number 4 we have Maki, Nanami, and Naobito versus the Cursed Spirit, the Special Cursed Spirit, Dagon. This fight is simply incredible. We get introduced to the Grade 1 Supreme Sorcerer, Naobito's amazing animation technique, where if he touches you and you don't move at 24 frames per second, you get frozen inside of a frame for 1 second, which can be devastating against a fast opponent like him. We also get to see just how formidable of a spirit that Dagon is, even though he was only a cursed womb. He really demonstrates that the special grade spirits are no joke and nothing to be messed with. I also like the comical banter that happens between the trio before they actually engage in the fight. Some really good characterization happens between the trio. I feel like if somebody who was completely new to Jujutsu Kaisen were to see that sequence, they would instantly understand what type of characters Naobito, Nanami, and Maki were. Also, the dialogue that happens all throughout this fight sequence is strangely really good for some reason. I'm not saying that the dialogue is usually bad for Gege Akutami's fights, but I feel like it stands out here as phenomenal for some reason. Also, the whole battle strategy from Fushiguro using his domain expansion a second time in the entire series, he hasn't used it since, to try to escape Dagon's domain, only to summon Toji by accident, who absolutely wipes the floor with him. It's a sight to behold. I also like the continuity of Dagon's domain being the secret hideout for the special grade Cursed Spirits team. And that whole sequence at the end, as JOGO takes out the entire trio by himself, even though moments before he was struggling to keep up with GOJO, really shows just how dangerous these special grades can be. I feel like this entire fight showcases the best qualities in Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, as well as just being peak shonen fun if you ask me. Definitely deserving of number 4 spot. For this next fight on the list, I just want to say that picking between the number 2 spot and the number 3 spot was probably the hardest for this video. But alas, for number 3, I'm going to have to give it to the fight ITADORI versus CHOSO. Now, do not let this fight being in 3rd place deter you from the fact that it's amazing, because don't get me wrong, people consider this to be the best fight of this arc, but it's not for me. This is the first fight where YUJI kind of comes into his own as a sorcerer, and fights an opponent that's way more experienced than he is. Combine that with the gorgeous choreography that the author draws in this fight, and you have one of the top 10 moments in the manga right here. This fight not only portrays Gege Akutami's gorgeous drawing style with the way he portrays martial arts fighting, but also shows the strategic thinking and background that goes into each fight of the manga. You have both combatants, YUJI and CHOSO, constantly thinking about how the opponent's going to react and what their course of action should be next. And then the change of scenery from the corridor to the bathroom with the water is stunning. You have the moment where the last remain of MELAMARU tries to help Itadori in his fight by giving him strategies on how to beat blood manipulation, which is an awesome technique in itself. And YUJI actually getting caught off guard by Choso's blood meteorite, which pierces his liver. Then his resolve to continue fighting even after knowing he might die in this fight just so his friends can make it to GOJO is not only an awesome character moment for him, but is also great foreshadowing. It all culminates in this epic moment where both combatants are at their limit, and YUJI, who's only hit CHOSO 3 times, even states himself that he was on the verge of losing the fight just because of how powerful YUJI is alone without any curse techniques. It's truly a sight to behold. And the ending itself, where we get to discover YUJI's hidden ability, False Memories, really just makes this fight a sight to behold and is surely a treat for most fans of the Jujutsu Kaisen manga. I personally can't wait to see this fight animated, as I'm sure it's going to be the best looking one by far. Now, some people might be a little questioning of my number 2 spot, but I assure you that SUKUNA versus JOGO is worthy of the number 2 spot for a couple of reasons. One, up until this point, it was kind of unaware whether SUKUNA was going to be a good guy or a bad guy in terms of what he does for the story, but this fight solidified that no, SUKUNA is indeed the main villain of Jujutsu Kaisen, there is no question about it. That being said, this fight is just pure awesomeness from start to beginning. It's only 2 chapters long, which makes it a short fight, but it's plenty of content that entire time. We get to see a meteorite get dropped on Shibuya, we get to see SUKUNA just completely outclass JOGO. The poor Curses had to fight the 2 strongest people in the verse by himself, and it's just really a sight to behold just how much of a monster that SUKUNA is in terms of strength. At the end of this fight, you get this very emotional scene where JOGO meets the other special grade Curses who died this arc, and he gets to contemplate on what his purpose on life was as a curse. And SUKUNA, of all people, is the one to give him the comforting statement, "Humans, Jujutsu sorcerers, cursed spirits, you're not bad compared to those I fought over the last thousands of years. Stand proud, you're strong." It's just a really emotional line that came out of nowhere for this character, and most people assume that it's actually YUJI talking to him. On top of this, you have the amazing paneling that accompanies their fight over Shibuya, with the amazing sketch art that is used to accompany each panel and each shot of the characters fighting. The way that Gege draws his action lines and the way that it makes it look almost animated with the fire coming out of SUKUNA and JOGO's hands looking absolutely stunning. I highly recommend reading a color page of this fight because it looks simply gorgeous. Just clearly the best drawn fight in this manga so far and is easily top 2 potential, only beaten out by, of course, number 1. Okay, so last but definitely not least, for number one, everyone saw it coming. It's the last fight of the Shibuya arc incident, and that is Yuji Itadori versus Mahito. This fight is not only the best fight in this arc, but it's probably the best fight in the entire series so far. It is straight up peak shonen. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to count this fight as the entire sequence from chapter 120 all the way to chapter 132, since that is kind of the entire fight, which means I include the Nobara part and the Todo fight. But man, this fight is just a truly beautiful sight to behold. You have the dichotomy of character between Mahito and Yuji that has been going on basically from the beginning of the show, and it comes to a complete clash in this entire fight. You have the philosophy of the curses gone up against the humanity of people like Yuji. This fight takes place in so many different locations that Gege has to draw, and it looks completely stunning from start to finish. You start within the mall section of the Shibuya subway, and you end up within a crater filled with sewage water at the end. And it's crazy to think about just how much happens when you consider that the fight in universe was only 20 minutes. We start off the fight with the death of Nanami, an amazing character in his own right, and a kind of secondary mentor to Yuji that sparks his resolve to keep on fighting even after Sukuna's rampage happened. Then we get this truly brilliant tactical sequence of Mahito having to change his fighting style to accommodate the new opponent Yuji, and Yuji himself having to adapt to Mahito's new tricks such as his delayed transfigured humans and his body dismemberment. The way that this author portrays his fights with the fancy paneling makes it almost look animated in nature. Each page is filled with such fluidity and motion that it's almost hard not to get excited for when you see stuff happen. To something as basic as a kick from Itadori to the more complicated movements of Mahito's transfiguration, this fight is just drawn with such technicality and emotion, it has you on the edge of your seat for the entire sequence. Then we transition to the Nobara part of the fight, where even though she hasn't had a big role in this entire arc, she still plays a vital role in damaging Mahito, and it's truly refreshing to see how different she is from the traditional third wheel of the shonen trio, and that she's able to actually be useful in this fight. Definitely an amazing moment for her character, even though she has been fairly absent from this arc the entire time. And her flashback that accompanies her death scene as Mahito finally gets her with idol transfiguration is a gut punch. Especially considering that you know this will heavily affect Itadori in the fight, almost to the point of him losing it if it wasn't for the help of his besto friendo Aoi Todo onto the scene. His arrival in this exact moment not only salutes this fight as just being a pure masterpiece, but also pays off the moment where he and Itadori fought side by side against Harumi, the other special grade curse spirit. With Todo's emotional support, Yuji is able to stand back up and fight Mahito one last time in the streets of Shibuya, and the genius strategies continue on for there as Mahito is put on his back foot and is forced to come up with more creative yet desperate plan in order to deal with the two combatants coming straight for him. He's able to use new moves such as polymorphic soul isomer and a domain expansion of 0.2 seconds, something he had just learned from GOJO a couple of chapters back when he had to use it to destroy the transfigured humans. Truly amazing character stuff, and a great villain Mahito is, as he's not only technically the underdog in this fight, but it shows his brilliant battle prowess, and is impressive in the fact that he is able to quickly adapt to such losing fighting conditions in such a short amount of time, especially considering how young he is in terms of cursed spirit years. He is truly what makes this fight so impactful, from his speech to Itadori about how curses and humans are just alike, to the other special grade curses putting all their cards on him as the final frontier for curses around the world. It all culminates in this final moment where Yuji has seemingly mastered the technique of Divergent Fist and also the technique of Black Flash in order to damage Mahito's new body of Distorted Killing and finish him off once and for good. With him standing above the frightened and beaten Mahito, Yuji simply says, "I'm you. I wanted to reject you, convince myself that you were wrong, but that doesn't matter now. I'm simply going to kill you. Even if you come back as another curse, I'll kill you. Change your name, change your form, I'll kill you each and every time. I no longer need a reason or meaning. Maybe after 100 years after my death, the meaning behind my actions will become apparent. In the grand scheme of things, I'm probably nothing more than a cog, but I'll keep on killing curses for as long as I live. That is my role in all this." And with those words spoken from the mouth of our main protagonist, we are left with this beautiful shot showing the hunter has now become the hunted. Well, that was it, folks. That was all 13 fights of the Shibuya arc incident. Please tell me if my fight rankings are misplaced and I actually know nothing about the series and I'm wrong about everything. Feel free to tell me any fights that I may have missed, even though I didn't want to cover the small little skirmishes that happened in between fights, as I don't think they were major enough to include any critical analysis. With all that being said, I really hope you enjoyed that anime video, and Merry Christmas.